The error of these judgments arises from the individual's lack of autonomy and unconsciousness, who either judges only by collective values or loses all capacity for discernment through ego inflation. There are people who enter your life and seem to carry invisible storms within them. They don't ask for help directly. They just exhale a certain heaviness that pulls your heart toward them. You feel before a word is spoken, that quiet call of pain asking to be understood. And if you are someone with a tender, intuitive heart, you can't help but answer that call. You listen, you give, you stay. You believe you were born to heal what's broken in others, to absorb their pain until they can breathe again. You think that's love. You think that's purpose. But over time, something inside you begins to fade. Your laughter becomes quieter. Your rest feels restless. You start carrying a weight that no one sees, a burden that doesn't belong to you. At first, you tell yourself it's just compassion, that this is what good people do. But compassion, when confused with responsibility, becomes a slow form of self-erasure. You start believing that peace must always come after exhaustion, that being kind means never saying no. And somewhere inside, a small voice, the voice of your soul, whispers, "You're disappearing." Jung wrote that the unconscious always seeks balance, and sometimes the desire to heal others is a disguised attempt to mend our own hidden wounds. The wounded healer gives endlessly, not because they have too much love, but because they're terrified of confronting their own pain. Healing others becomes a way to avoid healing oneself. You start pouring from an empty cup, hoping that in the act of saving someone, you'll finally feel whole. But instead of freedom, you find fatigue. Instead of peace, you find guilt every time you try to rest. You begin to feel in your body, the tension in your shoulders, the shallow breath, the insomnia that whispers you're not doing enough. That's not empathy anymore. That's self-abandonment disguised as care. The body knows when the soul is tired. It begins to speak in symptoms: tightness, headaches, anxiety, a sudden sadness that arrives without reason. And all the while, your spirit pleads for balance. Jung believed that the psyche compensates for every extreme. If you give too much light, your shadow grows stronger to restore equilibrium. The exhaustion isn't weakness. It's your unconscious begging you to stop carrying what was never yours. Real love does not demand that you shrink to keep others comfortable. It doesn't ask you to drown so someone else can learn to swim. It's not your task to rescue every soul that struggles. It's your task to remain whole enough to shine. The world doesn't need another savior. It needs people who have learned to keep their hearts open without losing themselves, to hold space for pain without becoming it. There is beauty in helping, yes, but there is also wisdom in stepping back. When you stop rescuing everyone, you begin to see what love truly is. Not control, not fixing, not carrying. Love is presence without absorption. It's saying, "I believe in your strength," instead of, "Let me suffer for you." It's knowing that your empathy is a bridge, not a cage, and that by letting others walk through their own shadows, you honor both their freedom and your peace. When you start to withdraw the energy you've been giving away, something miraculous happens. You begin to return to yourself. You remember what your own heartbeat sounds like when it's not echoing someone else's pain. You rediscover silence, and it feels sacred instead of lonely. You notice that the world doesn't collapse when you rest, that people can still find their own way to healing. And for the first time, you breathe without guilt, because the truth is, you were never meant to be a vessel for everyone's sorrow. You were meant to be a source of light, and light can't survive if it burns itself out. Your compassion was never meant to be a cross to carry. It was meant to be a flame that guides. The lesson is not to stop caring, but to care without disappearing. So tonight, as you feel that invisible weight on your shoulders, ask yourself whose pain you're holding. Ask if it's truly yours to bear. The moment you put it down, even for a breath, you'll feel something sacred returning, the quiet rhythm of your own life calling you back home. Because healing doesn't mean saving everyone. It means finally turning the light inward and realizing that your peace matters too. And maybe, just maybe, that's where real compassion begins. But what happens when the impulse to save others is born from a wound you never healed? There's a kind of kindness that doesn't come from love. It comes from fear. Fear of being forgotten. Fear of not mattering unless you're fixing something, healing someone, carrying someone else's pain. It's the quiet urge that whispers, if I'm not helping, I'm nothing. Jung called this pattern the savior complex. It's an archetype that hides behind virtue, wearing the mask of compassion, while feeding the ego's hunger for importance. The savior says, I'm doing this to them, but deep down, a softer, truer voice murmurs, I need to feel needed. At first, it feels holy. You enter people's lives like light, believing you were chosen to bring peace where there's chaos. You think your love can rescue anyone if you just give enough. But the unconscious has a strange way of revealing what the ego hides. Jung believed that what we call fate is often a shadow of what we refuse to see in ourselves. And if your identity depends on saving others, life will surround you with people who always need saving. They will mirror your hidden fear of being powerless, and you'll mistake that reflection for purpose. You begin to live on emotional autopilot, drawn to brokenness like a magnet. The more wounded someone is, the more alive you feel. You offer advice no one asked for. You hold on to people who keep falling, and you call it love. But behind every rescue is a silent transaction. You give to feel worthy. You heal to avoid your own hurt. You stay to escape the emptiness that comes when there's no one left to fix. The hand that saved begins to tremble, because it's also the hand that's drowning. Jung wrote that the meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed. Yet the Savior resists transformation. They want to change others, not themselves. Their compassion becomes control. Their love becomes duty. Slowly, relationships become uneven landscapes, one constantly giving, the other constantly taking. You call it devotion, but it's dependency disguised as care. You start to mistake exhaustion for virtue and boundaries for betrayal. The unconscious, patient but persistent, begins to protest. It sends symbols in dreams, falling from cliffs, being pulled into water, arms stretching out to save someone slipping away. These are not random images. They are the language of your deeper self, the true center of the psyche, trying to restore balance. The dream says, you are not the savior. You are the soul trying to breathe. The water that drowns you in the dream is the flood of emotions you refuse to feel. The falling symbolizes surrender, the loss of control that healing truly demands. And yet, it's hard to let go of the role. It feels safer to be the healer than to admit you're the one bleeding. So you keep reaching, keep rescuing, keep giving pieces of your energy to people who don't always want to be saved. You tell yourself that their survival depends on you. But what if the truth is that your identity depends on them? What if you built your sense of self around the illusion of being necessary? The savior complex isn't about saving. It's about escaping the unbearable thought of being ordinary. But every savior eventually faces the mirror. You begin to see that your kindness has been mixed with pride, your empathy tangled with fear. You start to notice how every yes that saves someone else often betrays yourself. The exhaustion grows louder than your excuses. And one day, you realize that the love you keep giving away isn't healing anyone. It's slowly erasing you. That's when the real awakening begins. The moment you stop trying to fix others and start listening to your own brokenness, something sacred happens. You no longer need to be needed. You begin to see that your worth was never tied to how much pain you could hold for others. You can love deeply and still walk away. You can care without carrying. You can watch someone struggle and still trust their soul to find its own medicine. Because true compassion is not about taking someone's cross. It's about holding space for their resurrection. It's standing beside them, not beneath them. It's realizing that saving people from their pain robs them of the very journey that could awaken them. You cannot protect someone from the lessons their soul chose to learn, but you can honor your own path by refusing to drown in theirs. Jung once wrote that the self, the wholeness we all seek, is born through tension, not avoidance. The Savior's task is to transform that tension into awareness, to see that the need to rescue is often the need to be seen. When you stop confusing purpose with sacrifice, you discover a quieter strength, the courage to let life unfold without controlling it. Helping is noble, but doing it to fill your own emptiness is a slow form of disappearance. The danger is subtle. The more you believe you're saving others, the further you drift from yourself. The soul doesn't need heroes. It needs honesty. And that honesty begins when you finally ask, What the price of saving everyone else has been your own soul. There comes a moment when you realize not everyone who reaches for your light truly wants to heal. Some are drawn not to your warmth, but to your attention. They come with stories of chaos, endless crises, and you, being who you are, open your arms. You listen, you give, you try to fix. But not all lost souls want to be found. Some cling to their pain because it's the only story they know. Jung once said, "Man needs difficulties. They are necessary for health." And maybe that's why trying to save everyone drains you. You interrupt the very struggle that can make them whole. The generous soul attracts many voices. Some seek guidance. Others seek refuge from responsibility. These are the 7 types of people your soul must learn not to carry. The permanent victim lives on the stage of their suffering. They don't want healing. They want an audience. Every attempt to lift them up feels like betrayal because their identity depends on staying down. They feed on empathy, and when your light dims, they call it proof that no one ever stays. The emotional manipulator knows how to turn guilt into a leash. Every time you rest, they remind you what you owe. They twist your boundaries into cruelty and your silence into neglect. Jung would call this a projection. They transfer their helplessness to you, making you responsible for what they won't face. Step back, and they call it abandonment. The invisible martyr helps everyone, expecting divine recognition. When their sacrifices go unseen, they grow bitter. Their kindness hides a wound. The child who believed love had to be earned through exhaustion. Gratitude will never heal what self-worth must. The wounded sage gives advice but never listens to it. They hide behind their wisdom, avoiding their own shadows by guiding others through theirs. They sound enlightened, but their words are armor. Listen with compassion, but remember, eloquence is not healing. The bottomless well consumes your time, your energy, your light, and it's never enough. Their emptiness becomes your mission. You confuse exhaustion with kindness, thinking more effort means more love. But their void can't be filled from the outside. The broken mirror reflects only your flaws. They project their insecurities onto you, making you doubt your worth. Jung warned that what we repress in ourselves, we project onto others. They aren't seeing you. They're fighting their reflection. And finally, the competing savior, the one who tries to heal you to prove they're holier. Their guidance diminishes instead of empowering. Their compassion hides comparison. True wisdom never demands applause. It inspires silence. These patterns aren't villains. They're reflections of pain turned identity. Jung taught that individuation requires seeing through masks, not judging them. Sometimes you'll recognize parts of these archetypes within yourself. The need to be needed, the fear of being forgotten, the comfort of fixing others instead of facing your own shadow. Awareness is the beginning of freedom. Not every wound is yours to heal. Not every storm needs your umbrella. Some people are meant to find their own light, and rescuing them too soon steals their awakening. Compassion is about carrying. It's about trusting their strength to rise. So before you dive again into someone else's chaos, ask yourself, are you helping them or escaping your own emptiness through them? Because love that drains isn't love, it's dependency. Love that empowers gives both souls the space to grow. And now the question lingers, quiet but piercing. What happens if you keep trying to heal those who have no desire to heal themselves? There's a hidden cost to kindness when it's not guided by consciousness. It looks like love, it sounds like compassion, but underneath it, something is quietly breaking. You start carrying emotions that don't belong to you. Sadness that has no story. Exhaustion that doesn't make sense. You wake up heavy and can't explain why. The boundaries of your energy blur, and the world begins to feel like too much. Jung wrote that when the ego tries to become God, collapse is inevitable, because the unconscious demands balance, and it will restore it, even if it has to stop you first. The generous soul bleeds in silence. It keeps saying yes while its body whispers no. At first, it feels noble, giving, helping, staying available. But little by little, your compassion becomes anesthesia. You give not out of fullness, but to escape your own emptiness. You offer comfort to others so you don't have to face your own ache. You call it purpose, but it's really avoidance. The heart that tries to heal everyone else eventually forgets its own pulse. There's a moment when love, without limits, becomes self-destruction. You notice in the quiet moments. You feel tired, but you keep showing up. You feel unseen, but you keep smiling. The world calls it kindness, but your soul calls it depletion. This is what Jung meant when he spoke of the shadow, the part of us that hides behind our virtues. Beneath the mask of the Savior lies the fear of worthlessness. The need to be needed becomes the addiction of the ego, and every act of helping becomes a way to silence the fear of being insignificant. You tell yourself that giving more will fill the emptiness. But the more you give, the larger the void grows. The person you're trying to heal doesn't change, and yet you keep pouring, hoping that this time it will make a difference. It doesn't. It never does. Because what you're trying to fix in them is actually what's unhealed in you. The unconscious knows this, and it will find a way to show you. Through insomnia, through anxiety, through the quiet resentment that creeps in after every self-sacrifice. Jung believed that when consciousness refuses to integrate the shadow, the body will carry its message. The tension you feel in your chest, the fatigue you can't explain, these are letters from the unconscious. They say, you've mistaken control for love. True compassion doesn't mean carrying everyone's cross. It means understanding that each soul must bear its own weight to grow. The desire to save everyone is not divine. It's the ego's rebellion against limitation. And when the ego refuses to surrender, life intervenes. Sometimes gently, sometimes through collapse. You'll feel it as the body's quiet revolt. The mind fogging, the spirit dimming. The once golden desire to help becomes a gray haze of guilt and duty. You keep saying, I'm fine, while everything inside you whispers, I can't do this anymore. That whisper is sacred. It's the self, the deeper center of your being. Try to reclaim its space. The unconscious doesn't punish. It restores equilibrium. When you've given too much, it brings stillness. When you've spoken too often, it brings silence. And then comes a revelation that changes everything. Not everyone you tried to save wanted to be saved. Some needed to stay in their suffering to learn from it. The salvation you offer was never theirs to receive. It was your lesson to release. Because forcing healing is just another form of control. You weren't helping them find freedom. You were trying to escape your own fear of helplessness. This is a turning point. The sacred exhaustion where you realize that overgiving isn't holiness. It's imbalance. The collapse that follows is not failure. It's initiation. The body breaks to remind the soul that love without boundaries is not love, it's self-erasure. And in that breaking, something new begins to breathe. You start to see that compassion, when guided by awareness, doesn't drain, it transforms. You begin to help less, but love more. You stop trying to fix and start listening. You stop saving and start seeing. Because the truth is, the generous soul must also learn to protect its own light. And sometimes, the most powerful act of love is to stop saving and start awakening. But Jung discovered a path, a way to transform that destructive impulse into inner power. Transformation begins the moment you stop confusing love with rescue. It happens quietly, like a subtle rearranging inside you. When you finally understand that compassion doesn't mean dissolving into someone else's pain. It means standing firm in your own center, while allowing them to find theirs. Jung called this sacred process the transcendent function, a living bridge between the conscious and the unconscious, where opposites, control and surrender, light and shadow, no longer battle but begin to speak. It's not an idea to grasp, it's a movement to feel. It begins the instant you stop reacting out of fear and start responding from awareness. Healing, in its essence, is the art of staying awake in the middle of contradiction, holding both darkness and light without letting either consume you. The first step on this inner climb is recognition. You cannot transform what you refuse to see. Ask yourself with courage, why do I need to be necessary? Let the question echo through you. It will sting. It will expose the old lie that love must be earned through sacrifice, that your worth depends on what you give. Jung called this the wound of significance, the deep belief that you exist only when you are useful. Facing this truth is not comfortable, but it is sacred. Jung once wrote, to confront a person with his shadow is to show him his own light. When you finally meet your wound with tenderness instead of shame, something shifts. The same pain that once made you seek others for validation begins to call you back home to yourself. The second step is integration, making peace with your shadow. This is the hidden alchemy of healing. The shadow is not your enemy. it's your forgotten humanity. Inside it lived the child who still wants to be chosen, the heart that still longs to be loved, the voice that still fears being unseen. You were taught to bury these needs, to call them weakness. But repression doesn't dissolve them. It only drives them deeper, where they quietly dictate your choices. The moment you stop judging them, they lose power. You realize that needing love does not make you fragile. Denying it makes you numb. When you welcome what you once rejected, generosity becomes pure again. You give because your heart overflows, not because it's starving. The shadow, once integrated, becomes a guardian of authenticity. The third step is conscious action, where awareness turns into movement. Before you rush to help, pause and ask, does this come from love or from fear? If it's from fear of being forgotten, unworthy, irrelevant, pause. That is the ego seeking control. But if it arises from calm strength, from love that respects the timing of another's growth, then act. Jung believed that consciousness transforms instinct into grace. When your actions emerge from awareness, your help no longer depletes, it elevates. You stop carrying others and start walking beside them. You stop rescuing and start witnessing. This is mature compassion, the kind that empowers instead of enslaving. Each pause before reacting becomes a thread, connecting your surface mind with your deeper soul. And as those threads multiply, the self, the inner center of wholeness, begins to awaken. The self doesn't speak in words. It speaks in symbols, silence, and sensations. It is a still voice that whispers, "You are enough as you are." When you act from this awareness, your presence itself becomes medicine. You radiate without effort. The people around you feel safer, calmer, more grounded, not because you fix them, but because you remembered yourself. Transformation, then, is not a single revelation. It's a rhythm, recognition, integration, conscious action. Every cycle builds another rung on a ladder that lifts you from fragmentation to wholeness. That ladder, Jung would say, is made of limits, sacred boundaries that protect what is divine within you. Limits are not punishments. They are containers for light. Without them, love burns out. With them, love endures. And one day, you'll notice the signs of evolution. You'll speak less and mean more. You'll rest without guilt. You'll stop seeking mirrors and broken people and begin to see God in silence. The same noise that once filled your mind becomes sacred. Hush, the space where your soul finally breathes. This is individuation, the slow, holy process of becoming what you already are. So remember this. The ladder that carries you out of the pit is built not from striving, but from stillness. Every time you choose awareness over reaction, patience over urgency, love over control, you rise. The climb is not easy, but it is sacred. Because each conscious breath draws you closer to your own center, the place where healing stops being effort and becomes being itself. But even the conscious healer must remain awake, for there are subtle traps ahead, illusions of mastery that can quietly unmake everything you've built. When you first begin to awaken, the light feels infinite, pure, liberating, and exhilarating. It floods your heart with clarity. And for a moment, you believe you've reached the summit. But Jung warned, the light without root blinds. Illumination that is not grounded in humility can turn the seeker into a prisoner of his own brightness. The first and most seductive trap is the inflation of the ego. After touching the sacred, the ego rushes to claim ownership. You start believing you've seen what others cannot, that your awareness makes you special, chosen. But this is a shadow in disguise, arrogance wearing the mask of insight. Jung called this spiritual inflation, the moment when consciousness becomes contaminated by pride. Real awakening is not about rising above others. It's about descending into your humanity with open eyes. The higher you go, the deeper your roots must reach, or else the same light that frees you will blind you. Then comes the second snare, the subtle moral isolation. You withdraw from the world to protect your energy, convincing yourself that solitude equals purity. But isolation is not enlightenment. It's fear pretending to be peace. True awareness does not retreat from humanity. It expands to embrace it. Jung said individuation is not separation but integration. The enlightened soul doesn't escape the marketplace. It walks through it silently, touching life without losing center. The more awake you become, the more compassion you feel for those still wandering. You understand now, Wisdom that isolates is not wisdom. It's the ego's final defense against vulnerability. And yet, the psyche has a way of keeping you humble. It sends you the repetition of old patterns, dressed in new faces. Once again, you find yourself surrounded by people who need saving. Once again, you fall into the rhythm of giving too much. You wonder, haven't I learned this already? But the soul knows understanding is not integration. The lesson repeats until the knowing becomes embodied. Jung taught that what remains unconscious will continue to manifest as fate. Life keeps returning to the same point until you can finally respond with awareness instead of instinct. The day you can look at the familiar chaos and say, I see you, but I choose peace. The cycle ends. Then arises the fourth test, the regression into guilt. Even after setting boundaries, you feel a pang in your chest, a quiet shame for choosing yourself. The old identity protests, whispering, you're being selfish. But guilt is not your moral compass. It's your conditioning dying. Jung described transformation as a series of small deaths, each one peeling away what no longer serves the self. The guilt you feel is not a sign of failure. It's proof of evolution. It means the part of you that needed to be loved through sacrifice is being laid to rest. Grieve her gently, but don't resurrect her. You are learning that compassion without inclusion of the self is still fragmentation. Each of these traps, though painful, is sacred. They test whether your awakening is rooted in humility or inflated by ego. The difference between illusion and illumination is not knowledge. It's embodiment. Real light doesn't declare, I've arrived. It kneels in gratitude and whispers, I'm still learning. The further you walk, the more you realize that enlightenment is not an escape from darkness. It's a partnership with it. Jung reminded us, no tree can grow to heaven unless its roots reach down to hell. The more you make peace with your imperfection, the more your light deepens. And then something extraordinary begins to happen. The light that once dazzled now steadies. It stops demanding attention and starts radiating quietly. You no longer seek to impress. You seek to connect. You begin to serve not from superiority, but from devotion. You see divinity in the ordinary, the laughter of a stranger, the imperfection of a friend, the silence between two breaths. Humility becomes your sanctuary. The awakened soul doesn't teach by preaching. It teaches by presence. And this is the final paradox Jung so often hinted at. When you no longer chase enlightenment, it starts flowing through you effortlessly. Your roots deepen, your branches widen, and you find balance between heaven and earth. You laugh more easily, forgive more quickly, rest more deeply. You stop fearing your shadow because you've learned to walk beside it. And in that union, where light meets darkness, where self meets soul, you finally understand. Awakening was never about escaping the world. It was about learning how to stand fully within it, radiant and rooted. You realize now that the light you sought in the heavens was never above you. It has been growing beneath your feet all along, steady, ancient, and whole. Rebirth rarely comes with noise. It doesn't announce itself with thunder or triumph. It arrives like dawn, slow, gentle, inevitable. After so many cycles of giving, breaking, and remembering, the soul exhales. There are no fireworks, only stillness. You take a deeper breath than you have in years, and that single inhale feels like life returning to its rightful place inside you. Jung wrote that the process of individuation is a return to the self, the moment when the fragments of who you were finally remember they belong to the same whole. That's what rebirth really is, not becoming someone new, but finally resting as who you've always been. You begin to see that love was never meant to be carried. It was meant to flow. The weight you used to call compassion was actually imbalance. The exhaustion you once called kindness was the absence of boundaries. Now, something inside you shifts. Love starts moving through you, not from you. It no longer drains, it circulates. You realize that the soul doesn't give to prove its worth. It gives because it's become a channel of life itself. The love that once burned you now warms everything it touches. You no longer mistake depletion for devotion. Slowly, your role transforms. You stop being the savior and become the witness. You stop rescuing and begin reflecting. You understand that every person must walk their own desert. The thirst, the silence, the long nights of searching. You cannot drink for them, but you can walk beside them until they find their own well. That's what mature compassion looks like. presence without possession. It doesn't demand to be needed. It simply is. Jung believed that the self doesn't seek control, it seeks harmony. The awakened heart embodies this truth. You no longer push the river, you flow with it. And then something beautiful happens. You no longer fight the world, you befriend it. The chaos that once terrified you now feels like rhythm. You begin to see patterns where you once saw problems. You realize that people aren't broken, they're unfolding. You don't rush to correct them, because you understand that everything ripens in its own season. The world doesn't need to be fixed, it needs to be seen. And when it is seen through the eyes of awareness, it begins to heal on its own. Your energy, once scattered in the effort to save, becomes whole again. You stop burning out because you no longer burn, you glow. The fire that once consumed you has learned to illuminate. Your compassion no longer has edges. It breathes. You become like a lamp whose flame dances steadily, never fighting the darkness but transforming it by presence. You no longer give light at the cost of yourself. You give light because you become the flame itself. The generous soul that once bled now blooms. The self, the true center of your being, finds rest here. It doesn't strive or prove, it simply radiates. In the mirror of your calmness, others begin to see themselves more clearly. You become a quiet reminder that peace is possible, that strength can be gentle, that love can exist without suffering. People feel safe near you, not because you solve their pain, but because your presence reminds them that they can survive it. Jung wrote that the wholeness of the self is both healing and contagious. When you embody that balance, the world around you subtly shifts. You stop chasing transformation and start becoming it. You begin to understand that every wound was a doorway, every loss a teacher, every silence a sacred conversation with your own soul. You no longer regret the breaking. It was necessary. Without the collapse, you would never have discovered your depth. Without the darkness, you would never have trusted the light. Every shadow you integrated became a bridge to peace. Now, even your scars seem holy, shining softly under the skin like constellations that guide others home. And so, the journey comes full circle. You started out trying to save everyone. You end by realizing that the only true salvation is awareness. Love becomes effortless again, like breath. You are no longer defined by who you heal, but by the serenity with which you walk through the world. The divine doesn't ask you to be perfect. It asks you to be present. That's what individuation truly means. Not an escape from humanity, but a return to it with open eyes and an unarmored heart. Because compassion without boundaries is not love. It's self-erasure. The flame that learns to illuminate without consuming itself becomes eternal. You are that flame now. So, if these words resonated within you, take a moment to ground them. Whisper to yourself, I choose to love with consciousness. And when you're ready, continue this journey. Watch the next chapter. The Hidden Cost of Awakening, Carl Jung. Moral: compassion without limits destroys the very love it was meant to protect.